Welcome to the fifth Alchematics Lunch and Learn session, where once again I'm joined by my co-host and good friend Gareth Way, who's the CHRO of CreditSafe UK. Say hello, Gareth.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see everyone.
As always. Okay, fine. So look, we'll get stuck in. Today we're going to be discussing work is what you do, not where you are. And I know there's been a lot of people interested in engaging in this topic as we've been discussing this throughout the network over the past few months. So we'll get stuck in straight away. We've got 30 minutes. As always, guys, look, if you have any questions along the way, put them in the chat box and we'll quite happily read them out as we go through the session. So, Gareth, let's start.
Okay, so I mean, this topic actually came up in a lunch and learn session that we did a little while ago. We were talking about onboarding, remote recruitment. And, you know, we were talking about the fact that within the network, there was discussion about what the future of work looked like from a kind of split between remote working and working within the office. And obviously, we're kind of 3 months on now from that session. And like you said, there's been continued discussion within the network around how what the future of work looks like. And I've got to be honest, I think something that's important to set out at the start, Rich, is that we've had a lot of these discussions. Basically, what we're doing is identifying challenges. Excuse me, and I'm keen to point out for everybody listening that I don't think it's going to be a case of we're going to be offering solutions to all of those challenges. But what we have found through our conversations is that these challenges are being thrown up in different quarters. So we've not been in a situation where we've had one conversation with any one company within the network and all of the challenges have been identified. So we kind of decided that this lunch and learn session was about making sure that all of these considerations are being taken into account when people within the network are considering how they're going to approach the future of work.
Yeah, definitely. I think that is, like you said, that's the benefit of the network, right? Because often when we're in a business on our own or within our own business, that is, we can only see what's immediately in front of us. But if we are aware at least of the challenges that other people are facing, or even the way they're facing the same set of challenges, then we're much better prepared to make changes that are becoming very necessary, I think. So look, let's get stuck straight in, okay? So how did you want to frame this? I know you were keen to talk about different personas, right?
Yes, I mean, the key thing that's come out of all of the conversations within the network is that there's essentially three personas that have come out of the way we've had to work because of the pandemic. And, you know, broadly speaking, those three personas, one we've affectionately referred to as traditionalists. And this was that group of people that kind of hark back to what work was pre-pandemic and expect to be back in the office 5 days a week once the pandemic has officially come to a close, if that is such a thing. At the other end of the scale, we refer to this group as the kind of freedom champions. So they're the people that have, throughout the pandemic, kind of thrived within this remote working culture, and they want to see that kind of continue on a permanent basis. And the third group, unsurprisingly, will fit in between those two extremes. And we've referred to those as hybrid workers, people that see the benefit of kind of working within the office, but also have appreciated that freedom to work remotely as well.
Yeah, I think it's fair to assume, should we say, that the majority of people will fit to some extent within the hybrid model, but we don't want to make an assumption because making such assumptions could be very risky for the business, especially if the basis of that assumption means we're going to reconfigure our workspace or environment. So I'm interested to understand, how did you go about understanding, I guess, the various groupings within CreditSafe?
Yeah, I mean, I think, excuse me, again, with regards to the discussion today, a lot of what we'll be talking about will be that hybrid workplace because it's the safe middle ground to aim for. But the point that I made in one conversation that we'd had was that what we haven't done as an organization within CreditSafe is make that assumption. we've surveyed the staff essentially, very simply, asking the questions with regards to how effective they feel they've been when they're working from home. And I should point out that we kind of separated this survey as well, so that we didn't have a disparity, or to identify any disparity between employees and managers. So we were talking to those two populations regarding the efficiency and effectiveness of working remotely, what challenges they've faced, and finally asking the question outright with regards to the future: how would they like to see work kind of evolve? And the results, I guess, weren't super surprising for us. We had 1% of the population came back as traditionalists. 14% came back at the other end of that scale, with regards to the freedom champions, and the remaining 85% sat in that hybrid group. But to your point with regards to making assumptions and the risks associated, you can imagine a scenario where as a traditionalist CEO, you think, well, I love the idea of being back in the office and being back around those people that I enjoy working with. Everyone must be of the same mind, so we're just going to go straight back to that policy. And you'd be in a position whereby, you've got a large portion, or certainly if we made that assumption, 85%, 99% of our population would be aggrieved that they're being forced back into the office, and suddenly the office wouldn't be a very positive setting. So I think it is really important to get that understanding of the kind of personas that are within the workplace.
I guess understanding those personas as well, will because I guess if you've made a decision to create a more hybrid place of work, let's say, understanding where people sit regarding that reconfiguration will affect the way you communicate to these individuals as well, right? Because again, you can't just, even though you have the majority that want a hybrid model, let's say, we'll discuss what that hybrid model looks like in a moment, or what it may look like, but how you communicate that to the traditionalists or the freedom champions can have an impact on whether or not it's going to be successful, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you imagine a scenario whereby those traditionalists are told outright that the office place won't accommodate them anymore. Suddenly, all of those things that they've been used to with regards to parking, it just sounds ridiculous, but parking spaces, having a permanent desk, for a traditionalist, that's going to be an important feature for them. So being able to establish these personas and the individuals that you have working for you means that you're going to be able to, I guess, accommodate each of those various areas. I mean, the other thing that we discussed within the network was you've got kind of two parts to this. One is to establish the existing workforce personas, but also to consider what's going to be happening in the future, because we keep using the extremes because it's the easiest way to paint the picture. But if we imagine that, let's say that the workforce does turn out to be primarily traditionalist, and you don't make any changes within the office space to accommodate those other personas, now you could be putting yourself in a position whereby recruitment and new candidate acquisition becomes incredibly difficult in the future. So all of these factors have to be taken into account. Hot desking.
I've run a number of different sales teams in the past. The last time I tried to switch a traditional sales setup, if you like, to hot desking, there were a number of different reasons why we trialed this. But I was surprised by the amount of people that just wanted to claim ownership over a certain territory within the office. I was quite surprised. I did assume that everyone would be mad for hot desking, but just goes to show you just can never tell.
It's quite frightening, isn't it? And I think this is why engaging the workforce within that future work design is so important. Because you're taking people on that journey then, as opposed to making them passive recipients to change that you're enforcing as an organization. So excuse me, I'm going to cough again.
Okay, so once you've identified who the personas are, how many fit in each category, let's say, where do you go from there?
Well, then you've got to think about how you're going to structure this this kind of future of work. And one of the things that we talked about previously was kind of where the I guess where the power base lies, or where the kind of locus of control sits. And the reality is that, I mean, that sits within the contracts and the policies.
Yeah.
So if we look at the kind of traditional work setup, we had contracts being exchanged between the organization and the individual that essentially was a transactional process of time for money.
Yeah.
And as we look at the future now with a hybrid structure and people working remotely, we're going to see more flexibility afforded to people within their working hours. I'm sure, you know, a number of people listening to this will have seen that within the workplace over the course of the pandemic. We don't have people working 8:30 to 5 anymore. We've got people, you know, they're taking the opportunity to start at 7, maybe take an extended lunch break because it gives them more chance to spend time with children, etc. And then working maybe a little later into the evening. So suddenly this kind of money for time transaction becomes challenged, and that's challenged at the kind of contractual level. Then you've got the concept of working remotely and working within the office. Well, that sits within your policies. And one of the things that we've, as an organisation, continue to struggle with, because we've not set the policy as yet. What we're doing at the moment is trialing different things and actually working with the staff to try and come up with the best approach. But on the one hand, you've got this concept of, it sounds ridiculous when we're talking about flexibility, but you've got this kind of semi-rigid structure where you agree with the workforce that there's going to be 2 days per week in the office, 3 days working remotely. Now, wrongly, I that's how I envisaged the hybrid workforce in the first place. But then talking to people, it was evident that that isn't how everyone sees hybrid. Yeah,
that's perhaps a more traditionalist view of flexibility.
Absolutely.
I'm in the same boat.
it's like, how flexible can you be? I can be flexible to a point, but the rigidity is you're definitely in 2 days a week. So, I mean, the conversation that took place off the back of this survey, when we established that kind of 85% of people want some sort of mixture of both, 14% want to be working remotely entirely. The conversation was, okay, so what does that look like? And the majority of people want true flexibility. So they want to be in a position whereby on any given week, they're having conversation with their line manager and establishing when is it necessary to go into the office. Because when you think about what it means to go into the office, why do we have people going into the office? If like us, over the course of the pandemic, the performance has continued, that proves that remote working works.
Yeah, correct.
So what are the benefits of going back into the office? Well, firstly, you've got that collaboration. I think that, you know, the conversation within our organization and across our network is that kind of face-to-face collaboration, or I love the term you use when we were having a conversation the one day with regards to in the room collaboration. I think, you know, that really does make a difference, being able to have those side conversations as well that don't take place when you're in the virtual world. So on top of that, you've also got, and this is something that's featured quite heavily within my department, is this review of the mental health issues associated with people working remotely in an isolated fashion for a prolonged period. And people are seeing that. So what they want is that flexibility to be able to come into the office as and when is necessary, because the reality is that working in the office isn't part of the day job. The example that I can use here is that I was having a conversation with our CEO about what it would mean to be working in the office. And we kind of envisaged this scenario where we used to sit maybe like 10 feet apart. There were 4 people within our office setup. And if all 4 of those people were on separate video calls simultaneously, that's going to create so much background noise that it actually negatively impacts your ability to do the job. So the kind of realization that we came to was that day job part of everyone's role, where you're interacting with the various people around your organization on a one-to-one basis, is probably going to be done virtually, remotely.
Yeah.
But the office will then become that hub, that place where people go to collaborate, whether it's on projects, whether it's kind of the managerial one-to-one. Certainly there's some sort of value in sitting there and having that conversation with people and being able to kind of paint outside the lines a little bit. So yeah, I mean, I appreciate the fact I've rambled a little bit there, but I think that
really interesting. Look, some of the things are really interesting, because what I'm hearing is that we're now talking less about managing people and talking more about managing real estate, right? Managing the actual office. So the question is, what is the purpose of the office? You know, if we proved that we can work remotely, why the office? Right? I know it's saying a bit more philosophical, but I mean, you tell me, because I know when we had this conversation the other day, there are a number of different factors you pulled in about, you know, the need for an office to, you know, be the place of not necessarily collaboration, but just where I guess the culture is formed. You know, that it's the home base to some extent, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you look at maybe it's worth us just taking a look at I guess there were some topics that came out of those conversations that we'd had within the network, and you know,
good idea. Let's get back on track.
No, and I appreciate it's entirely my fault, but I mean, we've identified these kind of different areas and we listed them before this session with regards to what is the locus of control in the hybrid workplace. Well, like we've said, ultimately your contracts and your policies, and I know we said that we weren't looking at necessarily giving advice in this respect, and this is certainly not giving a solution, but what I would suggest is that workforces are engaged in that process. Don't make the workforce the passive recipient of a change in policy, because I think given where the conversations have gone, that's a mistake, because without that input, you know, and allowing your existing workforce to play a part in designing that future workplace, I think you do run the risk of losing people. Let's remember that the risks associated with losing good quality staff have increased over the course of this pandemic, with the fact that so many companies can now recruit from anywhere. Yeah, true. You know, it's just expanded, so the competition's increased. So I mean, I think we've kind of covered off the locus of control piece, but then we look at the conversation that we had around, do we enforce a certain amount of time within the office? And again, I think that's going to be quite individual to each organization. And again, very important to engage with the workforce and ask them the question, you know, what does hybrid look like, and how often do we want to be in the office? But I think what's been really interesting about this part of the topic we were discussing the other day was, you know, if we were to, let's say, allow that, you know, the new hybrid model is such that you can work remotely, so there's no need for you to be in the office. But then we run the risk of, but if, for example, if it's tied to performance, let's say, but then someone doesn't perform for whatever reason, then they get called back into the office. Then suddenly the office becomes the punishment, when in actual fact, that's the exact opposite of what we want the office to be, right? So going back to my point a little while ago, we need the office to be this, like you say, this central hub, this thing that's important for every individual within the organization, you know, the center of culture, if you like. It can't be seen as some form of punishment. Could not agree with you more. I mean, I know when we were talking previously, I used the old PE analogy of, you know, someone going into a games lesson late and being told to run laps, and suddenly they hate running. And this is the thing with the office space. And it's a real challenge, because I mean, that's going to be the automatic reaction, right? If you're a manager and somebody isn't performing, the automatic reaction is going to be, okay, well, you need to be in the office. And actually, there may be nothing wrong in that, but it's the way that it's positioned. Yeah, like you've said, it's about, they need to be back in the office so they can perhaps closer supervision or training to be delivered or whatever it may be. But like you said, the perception of the message they're hearing is,
the office is the punishment, and that's not.
You're not performing, get back in.
Yeah.
And do you know what? There's another factor that comes out of that's been discussed within the office, and I'm sorry if we present more problems and solutions to people listening to this today, but there is a split with regards to the suitability of remote working for certain roles. And one of the examples we gave was there are roles where people learn almost through kind of osmosis, sitting next to somebody and listening to what they're doing and maybe learning from that person regularly becomes part of their personal development. And maybe there's a risk if we don't encourage people to really think about their role and their own development, that gets lost.
It's really interesting you say that, because again, your organization is heavily geared towards telesales, right?
Absolutely.
And telesales is a classic example whereby you have this osmotic learning, if you want to call it that, where it's not just about learning, it's about it's the culture, the excitement. It's the thing that gets you through the rejection, is to be surrounded by other people, because when you're on the phone, it's a lonely job.
Yeah. And that's the funny thing. I mean, those stats that I gave you with regards to the 1%, 14 and 85, that's from our group operational support center. When you expand that to look at the kind of wider population, what's interesting to note is that a lot of people that sit within those telesales departments do want to be back in the office a lot more. Our office in Italy, for instance, I mean, terrible story then, as much as they were all back in the office, and there was a fire one evening that caused office damage, and then they were in a position whereby they had to go back to working remotely again. So it's there's a number of challenges that get faced, but I think what we're talking about with regards to the hybrid workplace certainly fits for the majority of office-based support roles, or those kind of centralized functions. I think that within sales, field sales as an example, the majority of the time you would have been expecting those individuals to be remote to the office anyway, if they were doing their job. So
but if we go back to the point about structure, and this is the thing here, right? This is the two words, structure and flexibility, often get used against each other, if you like, but in actual fact, so I'm a strong believer in you can have a completely flexible workforce, but there needs to be structure, and sales is a classic example of this, right? So I've worked in teams in the past whereby we've been happy for spend your day at the water park as long as you bring in the money, but the reality is, what am I learning as a sales leader? What am I learning about this sales rep that I can replicate if he's at the water park, or if his activity is not measurable in some way? So there needs to be some degree of not even necessarily checking, but some degree of monitoring, so I can replicate success, right?
So I mean, that's an interesting one. I mean, I think that reinforces from a policy perspective potentially, but certainly from a managerial practice, we've got to make sure that our managers are really engaged with the workforce. So to your point there with the field sales and being able to replicate good practice, it's imperative that managers are having those one-to-ones with employees to understand if they are working remotely, and we're not in a position whereby we can necessarily see what they're doing on a daily basis. We understand how they do what they do, so that we can help others.
Because that's it. And quite often, and again, sales is a classic example. Quite often it's the poor or underperforming salespeople that get all the attention. The squeaky wheel gets the oil. But these are not necessarily the ones that should have the attention. I guess you need to redefine what attention means, right? But this is where I guess the structure comes in. So yes, we're flexible. You can be wherever you need to be that allows you to perform. But we want to understand that, we want to know what that looks like, so we can replicate it, because we want you to be the best. We also want to know how.
I mean, to your point there with be where you need to be, there was another one that came up in conversation a little while ago. It's maybe quite a unique situation, but I think it's worth kind of covering off in this session. And that was how remote is remote. So it was a situation where one of the leaders in the network had somebody that wanted to, for all intents and purposes, punctuate their holiday with a few days of working. And the reality is that in the current climate, potentially that's achievable. But some of the discussion that we had with that individual was about just considering some of the risks or repercussions. So, I mean, you've got, is there a situation whereby, regardless of how much work that individual does in that country, are they falling foul of some sort of visa regulations? The other thing that we looked at was, the level of support that can be afforded to somebody. So if you've agreed for them to work maybe 2 days within this kind of 5-day period, if there was a technical issue with, their laptop, etc., it's quite a practical kind of way of thinking of it. But would you be able to support them in that? And would that mean some sort of kind of back and forth when they came back from this working holiday, that there needed to be some level of adjustment there? So I mean, that's quite an extreme situation. On the other hand, right at the start of the pandemic, I know there was at least one company within the network that did a fantastic job of saying to employees that weren't kind of nationals, that if they wanted to go back to their home countries, they would continue to employ them and support them in the way they always had. And I think that drives such a high level of engagement within the workforce. And this company even went one step further and started massively. I mean, to maintain, as they did, to maintain salary levels at the local rate, when the rate in the home country could be vastly reduced, creates a massive amount of loyalty and engagement. But also, what they then found was that they could create kind of a hub and spoke design, so that you've got that person that goes back to their home country be in a position where you can employ a team around them, and suddenly your availability of or the catchment area from which you're selecting your new team members increases exponentially. So I mean, there are so many positives that we can take from this kind of future design of work, and so many things to think about. I'm mindful of the time that we've got here now, and I hope that we've covered the majority of the challenges and the discussions that we've had.
I think it's a good point. Look, to recap, I guess the purpose of hosting this session was more to just make the broader network aware of the kinds of topics and considerations we've been discussing with other members when we've been discussing what does the hybrid workplace look like. So Gareth, do you want to just quickly summarize just a few bullet points that I guess the takeaways for people who joined the session today?
Absolutely.
Think about as you go forward.
I mean, we'll go back to the start. That starting point is who works for you. Have that discussion, whether it's surveys, some sort of consultation with the employees, etc. Engage the workforce in that future work design. Then those other considerations. Locus of control. Think about the way you're going to structure your policies and your contracts so that you're maintaining and supporting each of those personas within the workplace. Making consideration for those specific scenarios that could come up with regards to how remote is remote, and whether or not you're building in some level of structure, not rigidity, within that flexible design, and also really considering that mindset shift from the transactional relationship with employees of time for money to time for objectives being met. So that kind of objective and key results style of management. The other thing I would say, Rich, and kind of just to round it off, is that the value of these sessions is vastly increased by the amount of conversation that we have within the network. So I would hope that everybody listening to this sees that value and engages with the Alchematics network, because these sessions for me certainly are kind of a goldmine of information that that help within these scenarios.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. Listen, thank you very much again for your time, Gareth. We'll be back here again next month with a more sales-focused topic in June. Guys, look, if you want to engage in the network, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. If there is any particular topic, sales or HR related, we can discuss in upcoming episodes of Luncheon. We hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you again next month. Take care.
Thanks very much. Take care, everyone.